They told me once that a true soldier doesn't feel fear. What they meant, I think, is that a true soldier learns to carry fear the way other men carry a wallet. It's always there, you know what's in it, and you don't let it run you. I spent 4 years off-world learning that lesson. 4 years in the outer transit corridors between colonized space and the edge of what the galactic community charitably calls administered territories, which is their polite phrase for anywhere humans still run the show without an alien syndicate, collecting a percentage off the top. Out there you fight for whoever pays. They ask that aliens who hired you will sell your contract to another faction the moment the arithmetic shifts. And so, the only thing you can trust is your own body, your own hands, and the small hard voice at the back of your skull that tells you when to drop and when to keep moving. You either develop that voice or you don't last a season. My name is Shozo Iwaki. Time this story begins, I had killed approximately 340 men, give or take, in 4 years of mercenary work. I am not proud of that number. I am also not ashamed of it. Numbers are honest. They don't dress themselves up in reasons. I was pulling security for a mineral convoy in the southern transit belt when the message came through on a civilian frequency, which meant it was meant for the man, not the mercenary. The encoding was simple, the kind my father's organization had used since before I left. 3 words and a name. Kenzo Iwaki was dead. I need to tell you who he was. He was the boss of the Iwaki clan, and the Iwaki clan ran our corner of the city the way a dam holds water. Not beautifully, but effectively, and everything downstream depended on it holding. Legitimate businesses, and not so legitimate ones. A medical clinic that treated people the regular hospitals turned away. 3 residential blocks worth of people whose rent agreements went through clan accounts. My father was not a saint. The work he did was not clean work, but he maintained a kind of order that the district needed, and he did it with a consistency that had held for over 20 years. He smelled like cigarettes and gun oil. He had hands that looked like they'd been carved out of old hardwood. The last conversation we had was an argument I had started, and he had finished. Not Mophonix, but with a silence that was worse. I said things I didn't say. He didn't stop me from leaving. I didn't give him the chance to ask me to stay. I had been telling myself for 4 years that there would be time to fix that. The message ended that argument. I finished the convoy job. I want to be clear about this. I finished it. Every hour of my contracted security obligation. Because I had 11 men depending on that paycheck and walking off mid-contract when you're the senior operator gets people killed. I did this, even though I wanted nothing more than to be on the first transit back to Earth and to find the man who had done this. Then I took the first transit back to Earth. I didn't sleep on the way. I sat in the cargo hold with the other contracted workers who weren't paying attention to me, and I thought about my father's hands. I thought about the last time I had shaken them. I ran through the names of every man in the inner circle who had the access, assets, and the motive, and the capability to do what had been done, and when I was done with that exercise there was one name left. Iwaki. He had been my father's #1 man for 12 years. #1 man in our world means the person who carries out the orders the boss can't give out loud, who manages the relationships that can't be put in writing, who knows where every body is buried and which officials have which envelopes delivered to which addresses on which schedule. It is a position of enormous trust and considerable competence, and Kurawaki was good at it in the way that certain tools are good, reliably, without sentiment, in a way that never made you forget you were dealing with a tool. I had never liked him. My father trusted him, and that had been the end of the discussion while I was still in the organization. He had organized my father's death. He had dissolved the Iwaki clan and absorbed its assets and personnel and territory into his own operation, which by now was a full syndicate affiliate. Alien contracts, alien infrastructure, alien capital, flowing through it in amounts that made the old clan's economics look like pocket change. He ran the district from the 43rd floor of a glass tower that hadn't existed when I left, a 40-story structure of alien composite and black-tinted polymer with signal arrays on the roof that hummed at a frequency just below the threshold of conscious human hearing. You didn't notice the hum consciously. You just felt vaguely wrong when you stood near the building for too long. The men who brought me this information were three survivors from my father's inner circle, sitting in a noodle shop in the Port District, with the blinds drawn and the look of men who had been expecting to be dead already. What I found when I sat down with them was worse than I had anticipated and better than it could have been, because the scope of what Kurawaki had built in 4 years was larger than a simple power grab. He was embedded, alien contracted, defended by security infrastructure that was not locally sourced. Better because most of the clan's civilian dependents had been allowed to disperse rather than eliminated, which meant Kurawaki was pragmatic rather than purely destructive. And then one of the three men told me about Nyoko. I should explain about Nyoko, though explaining her to anyone who hasn't met her is an exercise in inadequacy. She ran the clan's medical operations, which meant she maintained the clinic and the staff, and the supply chain, and the quiet network favors furs and professional relationships that kept legitimate medicine available to people who couldn't access it through official channels. She had been doing this for 7 years when I left, and she had been doing it with a competence and steadiness that made you forget, sometimes, how much of it depended on her specifically. She was also the person I had been trying not to think about for 4 years, with approximately 0 success. Kurawaki had always had an interest in Nyoko that went somewhere dark and proprietary. My father had been a buffer between that interest and its object. With my father gone, and the clan scattered, the buffer was gone too. She had not been taken yet when I arrived. The three men made this clear, and I held on to it. But she was being watched, and Kurawaki had made his intentions plain to her in terms she couldn't misread. I told the three men to go home. I took their intelligence on the tower's layout, their count of the security personnel, and their assessment of Kurawaki's schedule. I thanked them as sincerely as I was capable of in the current emotional state. Then, I put in a car heading away from the Port District, and I went to find the tower. What happened next is not a story about tactics or planning, and I have enough self-awareness to admit that. It is a story about what happens when a man with 4 years of outer corridor combat experience walks into a situation he is constitutionally unable to approach with professional detachment. I knew this about myself going in. I did not adjust for it adequately. The tower's lower floors were conventional security, human operated, physical checkpoints, camera grids that any competent infiltrator could navigate with time and patience. I had neither. I went through the lobby at speed, put down the checkpoint operators with enough efficiency that I felt bad about it afterward, and started upward. The enhanced units met me on the 4th floor. Kurawaki's syndicate contracts came with access to alien tech augmentation programs, body modification packages, developed in manufacturing systems far from Earth, now commercially available to any criminal organization with the capital to afford them. What it produced in the men sent to stop me were things that were human in origin and in the broad architecture of their form, but wrong in the specific details. The subdermal plating made them the wrong shape under the skin, too much mass distributed unevenly, a heaviness that didn't move the way biological mass moves. Their faces were recognizable. Their proportions were not quite. They came down the corridor with the confidence and things that had been told they were difficult to stop. And they were not wrong about that in general terms. In my specific terms, they were wrong. I had spent 4 years fighting alien organisms in the transit corridors that had evolved in gravities different from Earth's, with biochemistries built for pressures the human fits body treats as a death sentence, with attack patterns developed over millions of years in competitive ecologies that made the inner solar system look like a managed preserve. Modified human soldiers with alien tech plating were a threat I could assess and respond to. They were not the worst thing I had been in a room with. I cleared 4 floors before the helicopter found me. It was not human manufactured, or not entirely. The frame was conventional rotorcraft, the kind you can assemble from commercially available components, but the weapons platform slung beneath it was alien spec, targeting systems and rate of fire and round characteristics that did not appear in any human military catalog I'd studied. The gunner knew the platform. The first burst was precise. It took my right arm at the shoulder. The second burst came while I was still processing the first, and it took my left leg below the knee. I want to be accurate about what that felt like. Not the pain. The pain came later, in the way serious trauma pain often waits, but the immediate sensory fact of it. The world went very quiet and very bright simultaneously. The street came up faster than I had anticipated, and I remember thinking, with a clarity that felt inappropriate to the situation, that this was the wrong outcome. Then I was somewhere else. The room smelled of antiseptic and machine oil, and the specific polymer chemical signature of alien manufacturing. The lights overhead were a mixture of conventional medical and diagnostic. I was on a table that was slightly too narrow and slightly too cold, and there was a woman at the foot of it who had the look of someone who had been waiting for me to wake up, and had made her peace with the wait some time ago. She had gray-green skin, the Port District mixed heritage pigmentation, 2 or 3 generations of alien and human intermarriage, common enough in the district that I registered it the way I registered hair color. Eyes were dark and slightly large for a purely human face structure. She wore a government-issue tactical vest over civilian clothing and carried a sidearm she wasn't concealing. Her name was Senna. She worked for a government division whose name I hadn't heard before, which meant it was real. They had rebuilt me. I spent some time with this fact. I will say that I did not receive it with the equanimity I would prefer to report. The right arm, which had been taken by the first burst, was now an M-class rotary cannon constructed on an alien Biontech mounting framework and integrated into my nervous system by a surgical process that, in technical detail, I did not retain because I was managing the basic reality of the thing. When I raised what had been my arm, the barrel assembly rotated. When I formed the neural intent of a trigger pull, the feed mechanism engaged, and I could feel the round in the chamber, the way you feel a held breath. The left leg below the knee was a triple-stage rocket platform, articulated like a prosthetic limb, but housing a launch assembly in the lower section that could put ordnance through 6 inches of alien composite plating from 60 meters. I lay on the table for a long time. Why? I said. Sina had the flat expression of someone who has answered this question in exactly this way before, and found the experience unremarkable. Because, she said, we need a human operator who can penetrate Kuriwaki's security infrastructure and whose augmentation profile is alien enough that his defense systems can't reliably identify the threat vector. And because the alternative was letting you bleed to death on the street, which would have been a waste. I looked at the cannon that had been my right arm. Is Nyoko, I said. Sina's expression shifted in a way that told me what I needed to know before she answered. It was not bad news, precisely. It was complicated news delivered in a slight tightening of the jaw. Waki moved on her the day after you hit the tower, she said. She's in the upper residential section of the complex, 38th floor. She is not being physically harmed. He wants her there, not damaged. She is not there voluntarily. I sat up on the table. Cannon arm moved with me, heavy and unfamiliar, and the shoulder joint registered the weight as a pressure that sat at the edge of what I was willing to call pain. Then I need to be operational, I said. You've been out for 60 hours, Senna said. You need 3 days of physical integration work before the hardware is safe to use in a combat environment. I need 2, I said. We negotiated this to 2.5, which was Sina making a professional concession while maintaining the form of authority. She was good at her work. The 2.5 days were spent in an underground training facility that Sina's organization maintained in the industrial zone, a combination of live fire range and physical rehabilitation space, the walls reinforced with alien composite plating rated for the cannon's output. The cannon hurt. I need to be specific about this because I suspect the word doesn't carry full weight in a sentence. Every time the rotary assembly cycled under fire conditions, the interface between alien tech framework and human shoulder socket transmitted a sensation that I can describe most accurately as a scream starting inside the joint and radiating outward through the arm and up into the neck. It was not pain in the way that a broken bone or a cut is pain, which has a location and a cause you can identify and address. It was more diffuse than that, more systematic. The body's nervous system registering that something mechanical was being operated through it, and filing an ongoing complaint about this arrangement that I could not resolve and had to simply override. I learned to fire through it, the way you learn to run through a muscle pull. Not by making the pains smaller, but by making your relationship with it functional, by acknowledging it and continuing anyway. This is a skill that does not come naturally and must be practiced, and Sina's facility gave me 2.5 days to practice it. The rockets were different. The launch force transferred through the platform's mounting directly into the bone structure of what remained of my femur, a sharp concussive impact that arrived a fraction of a second after ignition. First time I fired in the controlled range test, I sat down involuntarily on the range floor and spent 30 seconds in a private negotiation with my own vestibular system before I could stand again. By the end of the second day, I could fire moving and stay on my feet. Though the impact was still there, still cost something, and I understood clearly that the cost was not going to be negotiated away. By the morning of the third day, I could put 5 canister bursts into a target grouping smaller than a dinner plate from 40 meters, walking, with the barrel cycling through all 6 positions. The rockets I could use in sequential pairs while maintaining directional movement. It was not elegant. It was adequate. Adequacy was what I needed. What I had not solved was Tetsu. Tetsuo Maruyama had been my best friend since we were 17. We had come up in the Iwaki organization together, neither of us from the core of it, but both of us drawn to its edge. The way young men who have no particularly good reason to trust the world find they can trust a structure that at least has consistent rules. We had shared money when there wasn't enough of it. We had covered for each other in situations that required covering. We had operated for years on the unspoken understanding that certain things between us didn't require stating. When I left, he stayed. I had known that was likely. He had made peace with the organization in ways I hadn't been able to. And he had obligations in the district that weren't portable the way a mercenary contract is portable. When I came back, Tetsu was on the wrong side of everything. He found me on the morning. I left Sina's facility, which told me the intelligence on my location had reached people I hadn't accounted for. I was moving through the freight corridor on the north side of the port industrial zone when I heard him step out from behind a cargo container, and I stopped and turned, and he was there. The man standing in the shadow of the container was Tetsu. In the way a building that's been gutted is still the building it used to be, the structure intact, the proportions recognizable, but something essential removed from the interior. He was thinner than he had been, and thinner, in a way that wasn't a diet or a hard month. The neon blue stim compounds that Kurowaki's network had been distributing in the district were written into his face and hands, and the too bright quality of his eyes. The compound elevated everything: reaction speed, pain tolerance, physical output, and took payment in cognition, judgment, and eventually structural biology. You bought 3 months of feeling like a weapon and spent the rest of your health paying for it. He had hands in hand a moment to see clearly in the freight corridor's low light, and when I saw it clearly, I wished I hadn't. Sumira was Tetsu's younger sister. I had known her since she was 8 years old. She had been a quiet girl who read extensively and had strong opinions about things she had read, and was not shy about expressing them to people twice her age. I had liked her. She had grown up and worked in the district's civilian infrastructure, and been, as far as I knew, entirely uninvolved in the organization's operations. Kurowaki's engineers had done to her was an atrocity I am going to describe in functional terms, because functional terms are the only ones I can sustain. They had used the same alien tech modification program that built the cannon into my shoulder and the rockets into my leg. Case. The platform was not built around a living combat soldier's nervous system and structural framework. The result was not a weapon anyone would want, and was not something I am going to describe in full. Tetsu was holding her. The stim compound in his system had done things to his capacity for judgment that I don't think he could fully account for. What I know is that he was there, and that this was the only thing Kurawaki had given him that still felt like it meant something, and that grief and drugs and 4 years of accumulating loss had brought him to this freight corridor. You don't have to do this, I said. I know, he said, and the specific quality of how he said it told me that he knew exactly what he was doing, and had decided it was the only thing left. We had known each other for half our lives, I am not going to make what followed sound manageable or clean. It wasn't. He knew how I moved. Had known it for 17 years, had sparred with me 100 times in training spaces and twice in real emergencies, where the consequences were actual. And I knew how he thought, which was the thing that made it genuinely difficult rather than just physically difficult. There is a particular cost to fighting someone you know well. The movements that would end it quickly are available to you. You can see the openings clearly. Training in your body knows exactly what to do. The problem is that the training is faster than the other considerations, and the other considerations are the ones that matter. I was choosing with every exchange to take the harder path, to absorb rather than prevent, to deflect rather than finish. The cannon arm I kept out of the engagement entirely. Not because I was being strategic, but because using it on Tetsu was a thing I was simply not going to do. And I had made that decision before I came around the corner. The rockets I never fired. I used my left arm and my body weight, and the grappling disciplines I had accumulated in 4 years of transit corridor fighting, where the other party frequently weighed more than a man should, and moved in ways that suggested a different evolutionary history. I held back, and it cost me, and I accepted the cost. The stim compound in his system was doing him a terrible favor. It gave him speed and pain tolerance, and a physical output his body could not have sustained without it. And it did this by consuming things in him that could not be replaced. I had seen the compound's effects in the outer corridors, human contractors who had gone to it because the operations required it, and come back from those operations with the specific blank quality of people who have borrowed against themselves and are now in the process of repaying. Tetsu had been on it long enough that the debt was already significant. He was not going to stop. I understood this. The stim compound had removed the part of judgment that knows when to stop, and the grief underneath it had been in charge of the direction for long enough that it had its own momentum. The modification frame in what he was carrying had structural limits that Kurawaki's engineers had not disclosed to him. I do not think they disclosed them, because Kurawaki did not care what happened to the frame or to Tetsu after the frame was used. Failure, when it came, was internal, not a strike I landed, not an impact I caused, but a progressive structural collapse in the integration between human tissue and alien tech hardware that had been poorly managed from the initial construction. It went quickly with a sound that I felt in my back teeth more than heard. The failure threw Tetsu down, and the stim compound's load dropped suddenly with the physical shock, and there was nothing under him. He lay in the shadow of the cargo container, and he looked up at me, and his face had something in it that I recognized from a long time ago, from years before Isun, from the specific face of a man who has been carrying something unbearable for so long that the carrying has become the only thing he knows how to do, and has just been forced to put it down, and is discovering that his hands don't know what to do with themselves. "Sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry to me," I said. "Be sorry to yourself." Stop. I sat in the shadow of the container with him for a few minutes. Not because I had the time, I didn't, but because leaving a man on the ground in that state, in that freight corridor, without a next direction, seemed like a thing I would not be able to live with cleanly. I gave him the location of the medical post in Senna's network. I told him to go there, and that I was coming back after, and that he should still be there when I did. He nodded. His hands were still. Then I went to find the tower. The North Face utility access was on a rotation schedule that Sena's intelligence package had documented in detail. Shh. I waited the 17 minutes for the rotation window, and then I went through the wall. This was not the plan precisely. The plan was the utility access. Happened was that I misjudged the angle, and the combined output of a half-second cannon burst and a single rocket applied to the composite glass at the second floor level put me through the wall rather than the access panel, which was 14 feet to my left. It came through, at the second floor, in a cascade of alien composite fragments, and landed in a server room full of network infrastructure and 2 technicians who looked at me and made the intelligent decision immediately. I apologized to them. They appeared to find this unusual under the circumstances. Then I went up. The tower's internal security network operated on alien-designed principles, which meant it was calibrated for a threat profile built from the alien-manufactured augmentation packages that made up Kuriwaki's security force. My threat profile was different. The cannon arm generated a thermal signature outside the sensor's calibrated range, and the rocket platform read to the system as mechanical equipment in transit rather than a combatant. I moved through 2 floors before anything triggered. The first response team reached me on the 4th floor. 8 men, all augmented with the subdermal plating and joint reinforcement and muscle density modifications that the alien tech packages provided. They moved with the weight of things that had been built rather than trained, the specific heaviness of bodies that had been made into something they were not intended to be. In the narrow corridor of the 4th floor, with the fluorescent overhead lighting and the alien alloy wall panels, they came in a tactical formation that was sound and professional. I had spent 4 years in engagements where the things trying to kill me had evolved weapons systems over geological time. Modified humans with commercial augmentation packages were a problem I could solve. The cannon cleared 3 of them before the others had fully committed to their formation. The remaining 5 were good enough to split. 2 flanking right, 2 flanking left, 1 holding the center as a screen. It was textbook. Against most things in their operational experience, it would have worked. Put a rocket through the corridor wall to my left, not at the flanking pair, but at the wall itself, because the structural disruption it caused was more useful to me than the direct ordnance. Pressure wave from the confined space detonation knocked all 5 off their feet, and I came through the debris cloud with the cannon cycling, and the shoulder screaming its continuous objection. And it was over in 11 seconds. The shoulder joint had been taking the cannon's recoil load through a mount that was still integrating with the socket, and by the time I was done on the 4th floor, it was informing me in clear and unambiguous terms that it was not satisfied with my choices. Carried that information upward with me through floors 5 through 11, where I encountered 2 more response teams of varying size and engagement quality, and then a stretch of empty corridor that told me either Kuriwaki had run out of immediately available personnel, or he was managing what he had left for a specific deployment. I found out which on the 31st floor, where a 12-man team had been positioned in a defensive arrangement around the stairwell access with alien spec long-range emitters that were the closest thing in his arsenal to a genuine problem for the cannon arm. The emitters targeted the mount interface specifically. Kuriwaki had briefed his security on my hardware, which was information he shouldn't have had, which meant there was a leak in Senna's organization that she was going to want to know about. I filed this observation away for later and addressed the immediate situation. The emitters needed line of sight to the mount. The stairwell had a 90-degree turn at each landing. I came around the corner at the 31st floor, landing at floor level, flat on the ground, which cost me the dignity of the approach and nothing else. And the first emitter blast went over me and took a section of the wall I had just vacated. From the floor I had clear firing angles on 2 of the 12 positions, which was enough to break the formation's structure. And once the formation broke, the advantage shifted quickly. Toot. By the time I reached the 32nd floor, my shoulder joint had moved past its earlier objections into a kind of silent, furious endurance that I recognized from long ops in the transit corridors. It didn't hurt less. It simply became the background condition rather than the foreground one. Floors 32 through 37 were quiet. The elevator lobby on the 38th floor was wide and designed to the alien aesthetic that Kuriwaki had layered through the upper sections of the tower. High ceilings, wall panels in a composite that shifted through color ranges just outside the warm human spectrum. A floor with a translucent section over a lit underlayer. Standing in it, you understood that it had been designed to produce a specific feeling in the person entering it. The feeling it was supposed to produce was smallness, and the subordinate urgency that follows smallness. I was too tired to feel small. I noted the design intent and went through the doors. The room beyond was large in the way that rooms designed to establish authority are large. More space than function required, arranged to maximize the distance between the occupant and the entrance, so that anyone who came in spent a significant amount of time walking toward the person at the far end. Kurawaki stood at the far end, which was the expected position. The augmentation modifications to his left face and right arm were visible even at distance. The subdermal plating under the cheekbone. The arm with its slightly wrong articulation under the sleeve. Naoko was to his right, in a chair that was designed to look like furniture and functioned as a restraint. She was wearing the same dark, practical clothes I remembered her in. Her hair was the same. Her hands were in her lap, with the particular stillness of someone who has been in a controlled situation for too long and has been conserving everything. She looked at me when I came through the door. I had spent 4 years building a version of myself that could function efficiently in conditions designed to produce dysfunction. I had, with considerable effort and intermittent success, become a man who could assess a situation containing a body I had gotten people killed to protect and treat that body as a strategic variable rather than the only thing in the room that mattered. She looked at me, and that version of myself sat down somewhere in the back of my chest and did not stand back up. "You took longer than I expected," she said. "I had some complications on 11, I said, and 31. There was a pause. Kurawaki let the pause be what it was. He was not a man who filled silence unnecessarily. He had always been patient. It was one of the things that made him effective, and one of the things I had never liked about him. "You've come a long way," he said, "for a rescue." "I've come from the 2nd floor, I said. "The access came through the wall by mistake." He did not smile. He was not the kind of man who smiled. "I meant from South America." "Farther than that," I said, "but yes." He moved very fast. I had been accounting for the arm modification, and I had been accounting for the enhanced speed that the alien tech packages reliably produced. But the specific combination of his arm's force multiplier and the timing of the strike, targeted at the cannon mount's interface point rather than at me, was something I had not fully modeled. The impact traveled through the mount, into the shoulder socket, and carried enough force to send me outward 3 long steps, and put my heel through the translucent floor section. The underlayer went dark where I cracked it. I hit back 4 minutes. That is approximately how long it took, and it felt considerably longer. The way time always elongates when you are in genuine danger, and the body is doing more than the mind can keep pace with. The first exchange. I brought the cannon arm up in a blocking arc to take his modified arm's initial strike, using the dead weight of the hardware as a shield rather than a weapon. Force multiplier hit the cannon housing, and the impact rang through the mount into my shoulder like a hammer on a cracked bell, and I used the shock of it to pivot instead of absorbing it flat. Pivot bought me the inside angle. I hit him in the throat with my left forearm, hard enough to move him, not hard enough to put him down. He was modified in ways I couldn't fully see. He recovered faster than a human body should recover, and on the second exchange he targeted lower, my torso, trying to get me off the rocket platform's base leg. If he disrupted my stance, the launch assembly's weight distribution would do half his work for him. I knew this because it was what I would have targeted. I dropped my center of gravity and took the strike in the ribs instead of the leg, and the pain was considerable, and it didn't matter. Kurawaki was not a simple problem in the way that his security teams had been simple problems, trained at a level that matched or exceeded my own, operating with a body that had been specifically modified to defeat what I was carrying. And he was not running on the compound of pain and grief and single-minded urgency that was carrying me through the encounter. He fought with the efficiency of a man who has calculated the most direct route between the present moment and the desired outcome, and is executing that route without interruption from sentiment. He did not get tired in the way I was getting tired. He did not have anything particular at stake except winning, which in its own way was a disadvantage, because I had something specific at stake, and that is a different fuel. He broke the cannon mount at the third exchange. A joint targeted strike at the interface between the alien tech framework and the human shoulder socket. Precise enough that I understood it had been planned rather than improvised. He had known where the structural weakness was, and he had been waiting for the right angle and the right moment. The cannon went dead, with a sound I felt rather than heard, a deep internal crack, and the arm became mechanical dead weight swinging from my shoulder. I kept moving, because the part of me that was keeping score had a name on it, and she was in a chair 12 feet away. Because 4 years in environments designed to kill humans had taught me that the resource you have left is always the one that matters. And the resource you have lost is only relevant if you allow it to define the operational picture. Because I had never been the kind of man who stopped at the moment when stopping was most justifiable. I had stopped things plenty of times, ships, transits, contracts, relationships, but never in the middle of the only thing that mattered. The rocket platform was still functional. The left arm was still functional. Whatever the transit corridor years had built into the architecture of my body, the specific habits of endurance, the practiced refusal to acknowledge a ceiling on what I was capable of, the thing that is not courage exactly but is the stubborn continuation of it, past the point where courage sits down and says, "This is enough." None of that was in the canon. None of it could be removed with a precision strike, or replaced with alien hardware. No one had managed to find the interface for it. The third exchange put us through the wall between the main room and the adjoining secondary space. I had his collar in my left hand and the dead cannon arm across his modified right, and we were both on the floor of a smaller room, with no design aesthetic and exposed structural elements. And he looked up at me with the expression of a man updating his calculations. "You won't hold this," he said. "The syndicate contracts don't dissolve because I'm incapacitated. Someone else takes the position. The infrastructure is already built." "I know," I said. "Then what have you accomplished tonight?" "I have accomplished," I said, "the specific thing I came here to accomplish." I restrained him with the anchor cable from the cannon mount housing, alien tech rated, which meant it was not going to be circumvented by anything human manufactured in the near term. Then I walked back through the hole in the wall. The restraint on Nyoko's chair released with a 12-digit code that Cinna had included in the intelligence package. I had the code memorized. I entered it, and the chair's restraint mechanism disengaged, and Nyoko stood up. She looked at the dead cannon arm hanging from my right shoulder. She looked at my face. She looked at the state of the room, which was extensive. She made a brief but comprehensive assessment of everything she was seeing, the way she made assessments. Quickly, without visible reaction, filing it all. "How bad is the shoulder?" she said. "Unknown," I said. "The mount interface cracked. The arm's non-functional. I haven't had time to assess the socket." She put 2 fingers against the housing, at the interface point, very gently, with the specific, careful touch of someone who has spent years assessing structural damage to things that needed to remain functional. It was the same touch she had used in the clinic on injuries people brought in at 2 in the morning, with unclear histories. "Cracked," she said. "Not through. You need the mount removed, and the socket before it fuses wrong around the interface points." "Tomorrow," I said. "Tonight," she said. "If it fuses wrong, you lose the mobility." She looked at me steadily. "The cannon is gone. The socket is still yours. Don't be careless about the parts of yourself you still have." We took the elevator down. I had earned the elevator. Cena's team was in the lobby when we reached the ground floor. She looked at the dead cannon arm. She looked at what was visible of the floors we had come through in the security feed. She made a note on her device. "Rawaki," she said. "38th floor. Anchor cable from the mount housing. He needs a medical assessment. He's modified, and the modifications took some impact." I paused. "There's also a leak in your intelligence network." He knew the cannon mount's interface weakness. Cena's expression did not change, but something behind it adjusted. "I'll address it," she said. "Tetsuo Maruyama," I said. "Freight corridor, North Industrial Zone. He needs medical extraction and a stim compound treatment protocol. He was one of my father's inner circle. He got maneuvered into a position he shouldn't have been in, and he didn't have the resources to get out of it." Cinna made another note. "Will be handled." Nyoko looked at me during this exchange with the evaluating expression of someone cataloging information for later use. I was familiar with that expression. I had been on the receiving end of it for most of the years I had known her. The mount removal surgery took 4 hours and 30 minutes. I was awake for the first 2 of them, which was Cena's team's preference, and also mine. General anesthetic, with the rocket platform still integrated, created neurological complications I was not interested in encountering. The surgical team worked in a facility 2 levels below the street, clean and well-equipped, and operated by people who clearly had experience with alien tech integration work. Sina sat in the observation space outside the suite for the entire duration, reading operational reports on her device. She was not there for my benefit. She was there because she needed to know the outcome of the surgery in real time. This was a professional courtesy that I respected. Naoko was there for the first 2 hours. Then she fell asleep in the chair beside the observation window, properly this time, her feet tucked up under her and her head against the window frame. She had been managing her own exhaustion for however long she had been in Kurowaki's tower. And now that the thing keeping it at bay was resolved, it arrived. I watched her sleep through the observation window during the portions of the surgery when I was awake. I had not slept in 40 hours. I was aware that the expression on my face had the quality of something I had been careful not to have for 4 years, and I was too tired to manage it back to neutral. I let it be there. The socket was cracked but not through. The mount came out clean. What remained was the original joint, with the integration points scarred around the interfaces, functional but changed. My own, which is what mattered. The rocket platform they assessed and left in place. The integration was too deep for field removal. The risk of the attempt was higher than the benefit, and Senna made the case clearly that the government's investment in the platform was ongoing. I was not in a condition to argue this, at whatever hour of the morning it was by the time they were finished. They put me in a recovery bay that smelled of antiseptic, and the polymer chemical signature of the alien atmospheric processing equipment. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling, and did not sleep for a long time, because there is a particular state of exhaustion that sits just past the threshold of sleep and holds you awake in it. Naoko came in at some point. She was carrying 2 cups of the strong black tea from the facility's common room. Shh. She set one on the table beside me without asking whether I wanted it, which she didn't need to ask because she knew the answer. She sat in the chair beside the bed with hers and looked at the wall. And for a little while neither of us said anything. You were going to tell me something, she said eventually. When you left 4 years ago. Yes, I said. You didn't. No. Why not? I thought about the honest answer to this. Because I was going, I said. Saying it, when you're leaving, doesn't help the person you're saying it to. Just puts the weight somewhere it can't do anything useful. That was a very considered decision, she said, for someone who was 26 and furious. I thought about it a lot afterward, I said. 4 years. She drank her tea. I drank mine. The facility made the low continuous sound of its life support and atmospheric systems. The sum of many mechanisms doing their work quietly, and it had no particular emotional content, but I had come to associate it in the hours since I'd arrived with the specific sensation of being in a place that was not trying to kill me. Came back, she said. I came back. Without the arm. With different equipment. Something at the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the architecture of it. You came all this way, she said. Through a building. Through a wall, I said. By accident. The building I came through deliberately. This time she did smile. Turned slightly away from me, as if she was addressing the wall with it. I would have found a way out, she said. Eventually. I want you to know that. I was working on it. I know you were, I said. That wasn't why I came. She looked at me then, fully. The way she had looked at me when I came through the door on the 38th floor. There was something in her face that I recognized from a long time ago. From the years before I left, when I had been careful not to look at it directly, because looking directly at it required me to do something about it, and I was never, in those years, ready to do something about it. Why did you come then, she said. I was very tired. I was in a recovery bay at what was probably 4 in the morning, with a shoulder socket that had been cracked and repaired, and was currently held together by surgical sealant and the specific stubbornness of human bone tissue, and a rocket platform in my left leg that would need calibration work before I could reliably use staircases without overcompensating for the platform's weight distribution. I had killed people tonight. This is a fact. I am putting here in plain language because plain language is the only language I know how to use for it, honestly. They were soldiers doing work they had been paid and modified to do, and they had been in the way of something I needed to reach, and I had removed them from the way. This is the arithmetic of violence, and I have made my peace with it in the only way you can make peace with it, which is to look at it clearly and not dress it up in reasons that make it feel cleaner than it is. I will carry tonight the way I carry everything I can't put down, not well, not always, but as honestly as I can manage the weight. Because I said, I spent 4 years telling myself I didn't care, and I was wrong about that. And I had been wrong about it from the beginning, and I should have said so before I left. She was quiet for a moment. You are, she said, with the careful precision of someone selecting words for accuracy, the most difficult man I have ever known. I've been told, I said. She stayed. She stayed until she fell asleep again, in the chair beside my bed, properly, with her feet up on the edge of the frame. I lay and listened to the facilist's mechanical breathing and watched the window lighten from black to the gray that comes before actual morning. Thought about my father, about the last time I had seen his hands, about the argument I had started and could not take back, and the years I had spent in various transit corridors and cargo holds and foreign operational theaters, not taking it back by the only method that would have mattered, which was coming home. About the fact that he had run the district with imperfect tools and real consequences for 20 years, and that no one who came after him, not Kurawaki, not whatever the alien syndicate contracts would eventually install, was going to do it the way he had done it, which was with the understanding that the people in it were people and the district was theirs. He was gone and had too late for the conversation I should have had with him. And that was the kind of loss you don't get to set down, not because you don't want to, but because there's no surface to put it on. You carry it. You carry it for the rest of your life. And some days it's lighter and some days it isn't, and the only honest thing you can do with it is not pretend otherwise. I thought about Tetsu in a medical facility somewhere in the Eastern District with the long work of recovery ahead of him and the longer work of whatever came after that. He was going to come through it. I knew him well enough to be certain of this, even accounting for everything the past year had taken. The stim damage was real, and it was going to take time, and there were things he was never going to fully put down. But he was built for endurance in a way that the compound and the grief and Kurawaki's use of him had not been able to fully dismantle. And I had told him I was coming back, and I intended to make that true. Kurawaki went to trial 8 months later, in a proceeding that was covered briefly in the news feeds, and at length in the kinds of channels that track Esalian syndicate litigation with professional interest. The trial outcome was what Sina had calculated it would be. Useful rather than final. Which is to say that the information he provided in exchange for reduced charges was more valuable to the government's larger objectives than a clean verdict would have been. This is not a satisfying conclusion in a narrative sense. Real outcomes frequently aren't. The syndicate contracts were reassigned. The tower changed hands twice in 6 months. The district continued its long drift toward an architecture and a cultural mix that was not the one I had grown up in, that was not purely human and not purely alien, but was becoming something in between that I didn't have a name for yet. Some of that is loss. I am not going to pretend that it isn't. There is a city I carry in my memory that no longer exists anywhere except there, and that is a real kind of grief. And I am not interested in being told that change is progress, and progress is good, and therefore grief is inappropriate. Loss is loss. You give it its name and you carry it and you keep going. The noodle shop with the blinds drawn is still there, under different management. Port District still smells the way it smells. Engine exhaust and street food and the faint polymer chemical exhale of alien infrastructure that I no longer register as foreign, which is itself a kind of change I have stopped fighting. The alien atmospheric processors hum their subsonic frequency at the edge of perception, and, on clear nights, the transit station on the far side of the district lights the sky in a way that is not like the old city's light, but is not without its own quality. Tetsu was 3 months in the recovery program. He came out of it thinner than he went in and older in ways that had nothing to do with time, and he moved back into the district and found work in a civilian logistics operation that one of my father's surviving circle had been running quietly. He does not talk about Sumire in the specific way of people who have put something in a part of themselves where they can carry it without being undone by it. talks about her in the other way, sometimes, when we are somewhere quiet and the right subject comes up. 3 books at once. When she died, he told me once. She always was. Cinna sends me operational requests, with the regularity of a department that has decided a resource is a resource and should be used accordingly. We have negotiated the terms of my availability in a way that satisfies neither of us completely, which is the condition of most workable agreements. The rocket platform remains in the left leg. The shoulder socket healed clean around the integration points. And I have full mobility, which Naoko documented in the follow-up assessment, with the particular satisfaction of someone who has been right about something, and considers it important that this be noted. I went off-world once more, 8 months after everything I have described, for a short contract in the outer transit belt that Cinna needed covered, and that I was the right operator for. The contract ran 63 days. I came back with no new hardware and a cleaner accounting of what I was, and wasn't willing to do for a government that was still deciding how much of its long-term arrangement with alien syndicate structures it was willing to defend with human lives. That conversation is ongoing. When I came back to the Port District, the apartment on the 4th floor of the building, on the eastern side of the market block, was lit from inside. The window was the one that faces the street. And from the street at night, what you see is the specific warm quality of an interior light. The suggestion of someone in a room that is occupied and lived in, and not waiting but simply present. I stood on the street for a minute. I had spent 4 years off-world learning to carry things without being bent by them. I had come home and learned that some of what I'd been carrying was not as settled as I'd thought, and that the way to carry certain things is not to hold them away from you at a managed distance, but to put them down and stand in the same place as them and let them be what they are. The window was lit. The city made its city sounds around me. Transit station on the far side of the district put its light in the sky. I went inside.